It's the LoveCrafts Show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the LoveCrafts Show. My name's Mr. X-Bitch.
And I'm Merion. Hello, everybody.
And we're back. We're back. It seems like barely a week since the last we spoke.
And there it was, only a week. And it's exciting.
Amazing.
Because we've gone audio. I think that's great.
It's definitely made it easier for me because my makeup skills are horrendous. And now I don't even have to bother.
Well, the secret is, listeners, that I can see Jamie while we're filming this because we've got a Zoom call going on. So I can tell you that Jamie has some macrame in his office.
Yes, I do.
Did you make that yourself?
No, I did not. It would be rude of me to admit that. No, my wife, she's ultra talented when she puts her mind to it. And for a little while, she put her mind to some macrame. So there you go. Well happy with it. Very happy. I've got a sort of succulent plant that, to be honest, is getting a bit carried away with itself and just drooping all over the place. But I like it. This is my new office, you see. I moved here fairly recently. So I was like, right, let's get a plant in and refresh the air. Because most of the time, the cupboard, like the double glazed windows are closed, the heating's on. There's no fresh air in here. There's just my carbon dioxide and other emissions.
Well,
so at least the plants will circulate the air.
I'm jolly glad I'm not there.
Well, yeah. Well, thank God Zoom don't do smell-o-vision.
Oh, dear.
I'm saying.
Oh, dear. Well, this week...
It's nice to be back.
It's very nice to be back. And this week, we are talking about kids and crafts. And the reason being that so many of us, well, most of us actually, around the world, are still in isolation from the awful coronavirus. And so we thought we'd have a little chat about kids and craft and how to keep your kids busy, if you have kids, while you're isolated. How are you coping?
And for those few countries that aren't isolating, A, get on it, and B, hey, you'll be nicely prepared thanks to our podcast here. So that'll be a result. So kids and craft for me is an interesting one because I have two daughters. One is about to be 3, one is about to be 1. It's virtually impossible to do anything resembling proper crafts. Definitely with a 1-year-old. We even were going to try and do some painting the other day, but knew that she'd just eat the paint.
Yes, so I remember that. Yeah, I mean, you've got finger painting and foot painting, and that very quickly turns into wall painting, I find.
Oh, man. I used to, in the old place we used to live, there was a session called Arty Tots, which used to be run out of, I'll just name check them actually, Leamington Spa's Art Gallery, Pump Room's Art Gallery, every Wednesday when you're allowed to go out in public, and it was like £1, but they had everything, all the painting set up and everything. It was almost like there was a classroom attached to like the gallery where you could go and do this. So you could do all the messy, painty stuff there and then just walk away from it rather than living in fear about what would happen to your walls. And that was fantastic. Like, loved it.
Yeah, I mean, my kids are teenagers, but I remember when they were smallies, they did do a bit of craft. Obviously not very difficult when they're very small because you can only really do a bit of Play-Doh and sticking and gluing. But I remember both of them really loved a bit of, sort of threading, sewing through Binker, that sort of crisscross fabric. And they both knit and they both crochet. Although my son is a really good knitter. My daughter can do both really well. But they've gone past that moment now. But they did really love it when they did.
Yeah, and I think that I'm quite looking forward to particularly Flora, who's the older of the two. She's getting better at things, and so it's quite nice because now she's starting to draw things that are expressive. So her creativity is starting to come out. So that's quite cool. But yeah, we're a long way away from proper needlework or anything involving blowtorches. So
it's interesting, because I was thinking, it's what you said just then actually about creativity. The most important thing, I think, right at the very beginning when they're very tiny, is to foster creativity and not to really worry what sort of shape it sort of takes, because they don't have the motor skills to be doing anything particularly funky. So on the one hand, you want to give them a sort of little project that they can do themselves, but you need to give them a bit of freedom around it, because sometimes, these sort of all the sort of things that kids come home with are very prescriptive. So like stick this here, this angel wing. I never really minded if my kids like stuck things at silly angles and did it all a bit kooky, because they have to be able to be free enough to create things. I mean, that's probably a nightmare if A, you had OCD, or you are just a general sort of controlly person. You know how sort of some people always do their kids' school projects?
Yeah.
I remember when Finn was at secondary school and he had to make a castle. And of course his castle was like really basic. And it was good, but there was a lot of there was wool holding up the drawbridge and all that. But there were kids going in with Hogwarts, that their parents had spent hours making. And so
the teachers must know, right? The teachers can't be like, oh, your child's done surprisingly well. He's made a cantilever bridge out of lollipops.
Yes, you're obviously a craft genius with that finely modelled cannon. But no, and I think this is the thing. We have to let our children unbox their creativity on their own.
I feel like there's something as well about making sure that they're given as many different opportunities to try as many different things, because you don't know what you're into unless you try all the things. So it's like cooking, painting, I don't know, clay making, if you give them an opportunity to try everything, then there will be things that they're naturally inclined to do. And I guess it's like trying not to like you say, hamper them in with the way things should be done. So you allow them the freedom to explore and get to know something on their terms rather than your terms. And because, I feel like if you're like, no, darling, the eyes of the donkey go on its head, like you run the risk of just putting them off of donkeying forever.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And actually, I have a lovely friend called Sophie. She's a darling, I have to say that. And she runs a Montessori nursery. And the emphasis there is very much on letting the children choose. I mean, all these different nurseries are wonderful in their own ways, but particularly with her, they let the children choose their activities and then choose how things are going to happen. So I remember sort of popping in and seeing them, and they would have their sort of clay and Play-Doh and water and stuff like that, and they would spend ages inventing things and dreaming things and making stuff. And so I do love that you do sort of give them scope. It's just hard to do that when you're at home, especially if you've been stuck in for weeks without getting really cross.
Do you think you could plot a chart sort of with age and happy, what would be the word? Willingness to do craft? Because I feel like there is a point of rebellion in every child's life where no matter what you offer them, they're just going to tell you to go away. So I feel like there's probably a chart, isn't there? Probably like a sweet spot of between like 5 and 8 when you feel like you could probably do some good crafting with your kids, and then maybe another one at like 15 to 18 if you can pull them away from whatever device they're attached to.
Yes, I think there really is. And I think, yes, that's the trouble. It's devices. And so as soon as electronic things come into play, you lose a lot of that. Although, in our defence, this is not a Victorian world. We don't have to play the piano to entertain ourselves anymore. But definitely people, if you went onto the Xbox or the PS, whatever it is, and you're playing Minecraft and they're building their own houses and things like that, you can say, well, there is creativity in those games, but
or doing animation or something like that.
But if you really want them to sort of make something from scratch with their own hands, from their own minds, yes, I think that's quite a limited windows. And I think what we've got to identify today on this show is
we can do it.
How do we find the sweet spots, and how do we encourage children to actually have a go?
Yeah, because it's I know that there are different models of learning, that I did a course once that taught me this, and it's kind of like if you're trying to teach people, some people will respond better when they're in nature. So if you've got a PowerPoint presentation and you even just like put a picture of a tree in the corner of the presentation, that's going to make some people respond better just by the presence of nature. And for some people, they're kind of kinesthetic, so it is all moving and all those sorts of things, which is then when you're doing stuff on computers, and all you're really doing is clicking your finger and moving your hands a little bit. Although you're not learning kinesthetically. And so for some people, there will be a detriment to their learning as a consequence. So as you say, probably trying to keep things analog, trying to get people using their hands and using their bodies and making things with different materials and stuff like that will really work.
Yeah, and also you have to get past, I think, that the whole sort of the children who like to get messy and muddy and have their hands in water, and the children who would prefer to have something that didn't get them soggy. And so there's you've got to identify with your child which way they want to go. Do
you think you have to lead by example as well? So not be afraid to This is going off at a tangent, right? I used to go to a gymnastics thing with Flora, and they had a big foam pool, because it was like teaching gymnastics. They had like pommel horses and springboards and stuff, and you would dive into this foam thing. And at first, I was like, no, I'm a man in my 40s. I shouldn't be diving into that. By about the fourth week, I didn't really care. And I was just like trampolining off into the thing left, right, and centre, and realising that by doing that, it gave Flora the excuse to do it as well, kind of mandate. So do you think with these crafts, it's one thing to be like hovering over someone's shoulder trying to show them, but actually you should just get down with it.
Oh,
like you should be doing them with them, and
yeah,
not go, I'm going to put a craft in front of you and wander off and do some washing up or something like that.
definitely. I mean, I think there is, again, you have to know how your child responds best, don't you? And we haven't, we want to be the sort of parents who could sort of hunker down and do stuff with them a lot. But, realistically, a lot of people don't have a lot of time or possibly even the patience to do it. But on the other hand, you have to let them sort of unfold a bit on their own, don't you? So you have to sort of maybe start off showing them that it's okay. Like, for example, sort of you jumping into the foam, or if a child's nervous about water play or paint, or you've got to show them that it's okay to have a go or get messy, or that there aren't going to be consequences.
And then maybe after a fashion, then sort of leave
Yeah,
them to it
so they can do it themselves.
Once they're happy with it.
Yeah, I do. So what I suppose we have to do is to be able to identify the sweet spot, and presumably all children have a different sweet spot. So some of them might be just inbuilt makers. And do you know, actually, this is really interesting. Well, it's only interesting to me. But when we talk, in LoveCrafts, we will talk often about, we all love, a lot of us love making. Not everybody loves making things, but I remember Edward, one of our founders, saying, making doesn't just encompass knitting and crafting and writing and painting or whatever, but also for the sort of tech guys, they're making great platforms, they're making great programs, they're that kind of making. So it may well be that your kids might be more creative writing code or playing the piano than they are painting or knitting or crocheting. So I suppose you've got to first of all identify what kind of maker your child is. It could be all kinds. It wouldn't necessarily be, the classic sticker and gluer.
And then how long do you think you persist with trying a craft that they're not interested in? For some people, there's a real barrier, isn't there, to the, we're all very hyped. We've been doing this, we've been doing that, and trying to slow down and go, right, no, we're going to do a bit of painting within lines, colouring. We're going to do a bit of gluing surfaces together to make a model plane or whatever. There's an amount of slowdown that's required and concentration. How long do you push against that before you stop? When do you think there's a realisation that actually, I wish my kid was good at model making, but they're not?
Yeah, I think there is. I think you've got to try, and if they really don't like it, don't get cross and try and make them do it. How often are we guilty of wanting our kids to be able to do what we like when they don't really like it and we want them to do it? So, I mean,
Flora is very reluctant to riding a bicycle no-handed, and I'm determined that she's going to. I mean, she's only 3.
She's only 3. She's not even at trike stage.
She's gonna do it.
But with like my children now, I mean, I remember Hattie really loved knitting and crochet for a while, and she made loads of things, and Finn, my son, made some great scarves, and his crochet was just laughable. It just ended up in triangles all the time because he just couldn't get the tension right. And so it became really funny that he couldn't do crochet, but he loved knitting. But now, if I ask Hattie and I say, oh, do you want to do a bit of crochet? And she's 16 now, she'd be like, nah. And my heart just contracts. I think, but this is the time. You could make your own stuff. You could be really cool, But again, you kind of have to accept whichever route they go. So if they don't, she loves baking, she loves cooking, she loves horses. She's not going to love yarn like I do, but then maybe in 20 years she will.
And then embracing their passion for crafts that you don't understand.
All tricky.
Because that's bound to happen as well, isn't it? I'm sure. I know pretty much how to do everything, but I'm sure somewhere in there are tiny things that I don't know how to do, like riding a bike no-handed.
Well, I'll tell you what,
Really
I
bugs
actually,
me.
it's a funny case in point, and I'm sure I speak for many parents at this stage when I say the word slime, because Hattie went through a phase of making gallons and gallons of slime.
Mm.
And I just hated it. I absolutely hated it. I had to go, oh, that's a lovely colour. Oh, a glitter slime. But I've really had to make myself sort of go, oh, nice. And actual fact, I really got on my nerves, the sound of it.
So we're saying create an environment for them to try the things, try and get them to try as many things as they can, help them with them, and then stand back so that they can find their own feet, hands, and then be supportive even if you don't fully understand the outcome.
Yes, absolutely. I think the most important thing, and I know it's a big ask, everybody, I know it's a big ask, is to praise your children for creating anything, even if it's revolting. just to find the good in it and reward them with your words and hugs and language, and because I think it gives such great self-esteem to have made something and then for someone to say that is gorgeous, or
And the thing is, if we're being brutally honest, like the first time you have to kind of bullshit that answer, it might be difficult. But once you've done it like half a dozen times, you'll be able to
easy.
go, darling, that's beautiful. Even when you're like, oh my God, I'm going to put that in a cupboard in the bin.
And also when you have to sort of, you have to wear the spaghetti earrings and the macaroni necklaces, you've got all that to come. But
The
so
clay ashtray, and
the
it'll be like,
clay
darling,
ashtray.
I don't smoke anymore.
And things like my son, when he was sort of from about, and my two nephews, Jack and Tom, and my son Finn, all mad on Warhammer. And Warhammer wargaming, these absolutely revolting plastic models. They have to make these plastic models and snippety snip them all together, glue them all. It's really complicated. And then paint them in very dirty colours. And then do these awful battles. And they're really gruesome, but they love them. And even now, Finn will say to me, see, look at this orc. And I go, oh, that's lovely. But I don't actually, and he knows I'm just talking rubbish because he's 19. But, he very much appreciated the fact that I was very complimentary about his painting when he was little.
Would you say that you have awkward conversations with him?
Baba,
Thanks.
you're brilliant.
welcome.
Are you
That
here
was
all
good,
week?
I'm here all day. Yeah, I'm not going
day.
anywhere. That's for sure. Yeah, no, and that's the thing. I never really got into Warhammer, but miniature painting and all those sorts of things. Like, it's quite surprising the amount of dexterity and skill that will appear in places that you wouldn't expect. So things like that is quite remarkable, And like you say with Minecraft, Minecraft / Lego / whatever is huge for kind of like that kind of creative direction.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lovely book actually called something I will remember and we'll put it in the notes, but it's something like Festival and Fun by the fantastic Ros Badger. There's all sorts of things in there about like festival craft, sort of making your own tents and feathers and headdresses, and it's really sort of fun family stuff. But I shall find the book, and it's behind me here in the bookshelf somewhere.
Do you think the sculptor Henry Moore, are you familiar with him?
Yes.
Do you imagine the first day he brought a piece of work home from school? Dad, it's 11 foot high.
I know. See, that's
So
yeah.
I always think that sometimes people that make big things and you're just like, what do they do with them afterwards? There's a couple of artists I can think of who make absolutely massive kind of sculpture things. You're like, what do you do with that in the off season then? Just put a tabletop on it? Or...
Well, actually, funny you should say that because there's a guy that lives up the road from me. In his front garden was like a gigantic robot, sort of metal thing. That he was an artist and he'd made this giant robot. It was really horrible. Let's be honest, it really was horrible.
Now
but
that it's
everybody,
moved, you've been like, oh,
Now that
it's
it's
lovely.
but everybody, you always referred to it as Metal Mickey. So you just be like, so you go up the road and when you see Metal Mickey, turn left. I mean, he would have been horrified if he'd known that. But anyway, so tell me, when did you start making things? Would you say that you were a maker?
I think I was a late bloomer, and I've probably got medical records to support that fact. It's a weird one. I wanted to. I always had this weird thing, and I think I've said it before. My dad taught at the school that I went to. So in Bedfordshire, where I grew up, there were upper, middle, and lower schools. And so the upper school that I went to, where you do GCSEs and all that sort of thing, my dad was a teacher there and had been since I was like 1.5. And as a consequence, the art teacher who I would have done GCSEs with used to tell me that she used to bounce me on her knee when I was a child. And that just put me off doing art at GCSE. So I kind of stopped doing all of those things. I didn't do art, I didn't do design, I didn't do any of those things. And I wish I had, because I feel like I would have enjoyed them, because I was sort of a bit aligned in that direction. So I think I was a bit creative for a while there. I had a flashback a while ago about a Bayer tapestry project that we did in middle school, where I stitched a man on a horse, and I sort of remember enjoying that. And that was probably the first piece of needlework I can remember doing. But then for a very long time, I sort of drifted in the wilderness, brought to you in association in the early days with Guns N' Roses and Poodle Rock and heavy metal and Jack Daniels. Didn't really do much creative stuff until, I don't know, I was probably like in my mid-30s or something. So I feel like I could have been, but I was just a bit of a wasted talent, never really flourished into it until sometime in the future, hopefully.
Yeah.
You?
Oh, I was right there at the beginning. I'm absolutely obsessed. Right, I must have driven my mother insane. So legend has it that I was walking at 9 months and I drove her bananas right from the beginning. And luckily my children were complete slugs and didn't move till they were 18 months. Marvellous. But so it didn't go through the genes. But I think I can remember cooking first was always my first love. And so I remember somebody bought me a cookbook when I was really small, and it had loads of really gorgeous little recipes in for things like peppermint creams in the shape of a dog bone and things like that. I just drove my mum insane because I wanted to make these things all the time. I wanted to cook everything in my cookery book. I used to make stuff with my grandma, pastry and pies and bread, and so I was very lucky. So I had my mum and my grandmother, and we used to make all sorts of things. Although my mum doesn't really like cooking, so she was a really big ask for her.
She was very much like, that's marvellous, darling.
Yes, lovely. But she always did a fair bit of sewing, and my grandma always knitted and crocheted. And so I was very, very taken with that very early on. And I do remember my two of my boy cousins, Robert and Philip, they one day were being taught to do finger knitting with my grandma. And me and my sister, this is how sexist the old world was. Me and my sister were being sat down by a very lovely auntie of ours to learn how to do shorthand. And she bought us pencils and notebooks. And as lovely as that was, I do remember looking at the boys doing finger knitting and being insanely jealous. But I always used to do things like I used to make rose petal perfume in the garden. And, I was just one of those really, really annoying kids who was making something.
That's cool.
Or like cutting fabric up to make dolls' clothes. And finding, I can remember finding little knitting patterns in a Twinkle comic for some dolls' clothes and saying to my grandma, please, will you make these for me? And she did. And actually my sister and I still got those.
Did you have other friends that you could make with at the time? Or because that's probably the other thing, isn't it? Is if you can get a few people together and have like a craft club or something like that, then you may have a chance of a bit of momentum. Or were you quite solitary in your crafting?
Well, I think the sort of craft club is a modern phenomenon. I think when I was little, nobody really made any. It was just like in your house. So you just sort of did stuff. I had a lot of cousins and sister. My sister and I and my brother. So I was quite blessed in that sense,
I suppose I use the term craft club in the same way as people use the term play date, which is just a way of making something sound fancy. But I guess if you can get a bunch of kids together to do something together, maybe you've got a better chance of that sticking.
Yeah, I think if you're brave enough, if you can get a load of kids together and say, come on, let's make bath bombs. Wow, you have to be brave to do that. But if you can, that's really cool.
I can't. The thing is I can't, without digging into the depths of my memories, I can't remember making a lot when I was a kid, and I must have. I think I read a lot. I think I was quite a reader, And so I used to do that. And I was an only child, and both of my parents were only children. And then they separated when I was 8. So it was quite a solitary existence, which is where I developed a love of crisp sandwiches, which has stuck with me ever since. So maybe that was cooking. Maybe that was cooking. I do, if you give me a sandwich, I'll tell you the best crisps to go with it. But I think, I can remember making a George's Marvellous Medicine with my friend Gareth, who lived across the road, and we contemplated giving it to his brother, but it did have all the bad stuff out of the shed. And I'm pretty sure when we poured it on the ground, upon reflection, like that, nothing grew on that piece of earth for a while.
So it's really toxic. But that's the thing.
Dodged a bullet
I
there.
used to love. I used to also make. This is the thing when I was, obviously I'm much older than you, and I.
Are you? You're not much older
I'm
than me.
quite older than you. I'm 52, nearly 53.
Get out.
Oh God, I love it when he says things like that.
I thought
Yes,
you
I
were
am.
like 28.
28. Yeah, no.
I've never met you.
You have.
Right.
You have. You're just being kind. So I think there was a lot more freedom as well. I mean, there was a lot of mud pie making used to go on. In the garden we used to do a lot of mud balls and mud pies and stuff like that. So I think we're in a bit of a cleaner world now. People don't really like their kids going out and putting the hose onto the borders and mixing it up into a mud soup.
It's true,
which
yeah.
is a shame, but because it's a nice thing to do. But
Yeah, there's a much more sort of homogenized sense of like dirty play. That sounds
it is
wrong. But
homogenised.
yeah.
You're right, it is homogenised.
They say a subscription to the LoveCrafts Show is like an entry into a higher dimension. Why don't you find out for yourself? As I stare out upon a golden pond and I see a lonely seagull floating across a lake, I think, LoveCrafts Show.
But don't you ever then think, what's a seagull doing by a golden pond? It should be by the sea, no? If you think, I mean, we all sort of try and think that our children are sort of have the strength of superheroes. I mean, they're not. They're just people in miniature. And so sometimes you think, well, we, as adults ourselves, we need to be enticed to do things sometimes. We don't automatically just want to do things, So I suppose a little bit of enticement is okay.
Did you ever enjoy the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon?
I remember them, yes.
Yeah, and his dad, Calvin, was just, little rebellious, whatever, with Hobbes' imaginary tiger. But his dad was always like, right, it's 4:00 in the morning, let's go camping. And he's just like, come on, we all think we're that kind of parent. But if someone turned up at my house at 4:00 in the morning, they get short shrift.
Oh, and me.
So I suppose that's it, isn't it? You got to give them their foibles. You can't expect them to do all the things all the time. But actually, if you push and let go and give them a bit of time to goof around, maybe they'll come back to it at their own pace.
If we go up the age groups, then when you get to tweens and teens, where you have less, you obviously have a lot less power to make something enticing and fun. It's not going to be very many teens and tweens who are going to say, yeah, okay, Daddy, I'll come and do some cross-stitch with you.
The one thing I've observed from having taught cross-stitch to young people of those sorts of ages is if you can get them over the hump of trying it in the first place, if they try these things, spin forward like an hour, and then you've got a better chance of engaging with them about other things because they're in a better headspace and more slowness and stuff like that. So it's almost like it dissolves their tweenness and teenness and brings out their human beingness if they get the chance to get around it.
Jamie, that was beautiful. Your teenness and tweenness and human beingness.
Yeah,
Marvellous.
and I know that I'm a bit of a novelty that that's why I'm able to do some work with schools is because I can go look, do some bloody cross stitch, and that will be enough to get them over the hump in the first place, and then they can try it, and then the sort of magic happens.
Well, I can remember my son's class at school. When they were sort of coming up 9-10 years old, sort of year 5, year 6, and they loved sewing. They loved it. All the boys were doing I think they were all doing sort of like a big picture for one of their teachers that was leaving, and they all wanted to sew something on it. Sort of doing sort of cross stitch but with wool. So what's that called when you do cross stitch with wool?
I mean, if it's just a single stitch, it's going to be tapestry. Isn't it? Or needlepoint.
Yeah. And but also then I went in to sort of teach the kids to knit. And the boys were just as enthusiastic as the girls about learning to knit. They really were. Some of them were fantastic, and they really got into it and were much more keen than some of the girls. And so I thought that was fantastic, because you wonder sometimes if the boys are going to crumple a bit under the peer pressure. Even if they want to do it, they might think, oh no, the other boys want to play football and they don't want to knit. But actually, they all really loved it, and they might never knit again, but they loved it at the time, and it was great for their little fingers and creativity. And when you have that thing, when you're teaching people yarn crafts like that, you want to give them something so that they can finish it. So sort of like if you're going to make a scarf for a teddy or something, or you're going to make a little coin purse, or you're going to make a bookmark or whatever. In this case, we were making squares that we were going to stitch together for a cushion. And I realised very early on that squares was just too prescriptive. So we had to just do shapes, because there were stitches dropped all over the place, and then stitch them all together to make a cushion. And they loved being part of that project altogether. So that sort of adds a bit of weight to your theory of crafting in numbers later on, is such a good thing when they're all part of the same goal.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it, I suppose, because the situation we're in the modern time is that crafting as a school curriculum item is a scarcity.
Yeah.
I find that when I'm doing teaching, it's more from a pastoral standpoint, because they recognise the value it is in well-being. And so then it's a shame that these things are, I'm guessing they still do, what do they call them? Destructive technologies or something. And you kind of wish in a way that there was a dedicated part of the curriculum that was teaching handcrafts, do the whole spectrum of them in a 2-year period or whatever, because then you get that opportunity.
Yes, and so many people in other countries, in Norway and Finland and Iceland, they all learn to knit as part of the school curriculum. And so they're all making socks all the time in Sweden, and it's just fantastic. I just don't think we have the bandwidth for that anymore, because anything creative has kind of been sidelined, unfortunately. Very short-sighted, but there it is.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that, the value of science, technology, English and maths, they're important. But actually things like technology and science and lateral thinking and all those sorts of things, like crafts, are great tools for exploring those areas, aren't they? So it's almost like, I know that it almost feels like they've been disconnected, and yet crafting and design sit hand in hand completely.
And the other people I always think get very ignored on the craft front are the teenagers. There are a lot of sort of teenagers who would love to start making their own clothes, and I think that's something we're going to see a lot more of as time goes on, because it's becoming a lot more sort of fashionable.
No, I remember back in the day, because the thing is when you're a teenager, you want to express your individuality. The irony being that for a lot of us, I remember I was into heavy metal, used to wear heavy metal t-shirts, Jack Daniels t-shirt, leather, like denim jacket with patches on, smoked Marlboro lights, went to university, met 500 people doing exactly the same thing. So you try and express yourself individually, but you end up doing it with a sort of herd mentality you didn't realise. But actually, by doing some of the things we're talking about, you've got more creative freedom to express yourself actually individually, rather than tapping into brands that you think reflect your individuality.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to confidence and self-esteem, both of which are in very short supply in modern teenagers, which is really tragic. But perhaps if we can begin with the small children to give them confidence in the things that they make, then by the time they get to being teenagers, they will have confidence to make things, and they'll value what they make themselves instead of valuing what somebody else makes. Hopefully their self-esteem will be at the point where they'll say, no, I made this myself and I like it best because I made it myself.
Yeah.
Which is something you don't learn till later, yeah.
Yeah. And in saying that I made this myself, it's appreciated by other people with the same value that something bespoke is. Because I always think that's a weird... it's semantics, isn't it? But if you're like, it's handmade, people are like, if it's bespoke, you're like, ooh.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing.
Isn't that
right?
extraordinary? Yes, it really is. Artisan. Yeah, bespoke.
Exactly.
Yeah, we need to bring that concept back to kids' craft.
It starts now. Doesn't it start now?
It starts now, Jamie. Let's start the movement.
I'm starting a movement now.
No, don't start a movement. Not in that room all on your own.
I've got a plant. It's circulating the air.
Now, so we asked our audience, our lovely Instagrammers, and we said to them,
God bless you all.
Oh, I love them. So we sent out some questions, and this is the state of the poll. So, number one question: do you have kids, tweens, or teens at home to entertain? So, how many people do you think said yes, they have? Percentage.
Oh, it's hard, isn't it? It's the right movable feast. Let's say 70-30. 70 said, yes, I'm tearing my hair out with my beloved offspring. No?
It's 44% have told us that they have kids at home to entertain. It's quite low, isn't it? I thought it'd be higher than that. Yeah. And so then we said, do your kids, tweens or teens craft at home as well?
Well, you would hope of the 44% who said yes to the LoveCrafts Instagram that they're going to be like 80%?
Well, no, but it's still it's not terrible. 55% of those kids, tweens, and teens, they craft at home as well. So I mean that's okay.
I live in a world of optimism, naive optimism. Clearly,
this is the next question. How are you doing with keeping them entertained?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. To put it in context, isn't it? The world is a funny place at this precise moment in time. We're still in a honeymoon period about all this, aren't we? Like, spin forward 6 weeks and people will be like, oh my God. I mean, we'll still be here, so that'll be a blessing.
Yes.
Like, the 5 stages of grief, and there's denial and anger and negotiation. There's probably a lot of that at the moment before depression, or maybe depression as well, and then acceptance. So 60-40? 60 not coping?
Nearly. No, well, actually, yes, you're right. It's very close, actually. 58% not coping, 42% coping.
Bless you.
So we need to help you. We need to help you to cope. So we asked some of our audience for their hints and tips.
Right.
So
hints and tips on how to get your kids crafting at home without losing
it.
The will, yeah.
And so here we go. So Sally, 66, she says, give a 9-year-old a cardboard box, glue gun, and 250 glue gun sticks. Sit back and enjoy. That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah. Glue guns. Yeah. That's a good one. I think in some ways, like a cardboard box, some pens, and a bit of free will can go a long way for a lot of children, I would have thought.
Yeah, because you can make so much out of a cardboard box, can't you? I mean, even if it's a small cardboard box that your cat's going to live in, there's an awful lot of colouring in to do, and sticking things on it, and you can dangle pom-poms off there for a cat to play with.
Even if you just turn the box upside down and take a torch in and read the works of Edgar Allan Poe, I mean, you're still using the box, right?
Yes, you are. That's quite an ask, but yes, you are. So, I mean, yes, you could transform a box into anything. So
I think that's a great idea.
So we had here from Gemma Chapman X. She says she's got a stash of random crafts that she's gathered of the last 15 years and some creativity with a big sort of muscle arm. So she's obviously a pro at entertaining her kids.
I suppose in a way you probably do, don't you? If you're a crafts person, you probably do gather things, and maybe there's something about, if you've got young children like I do, it's a smart move to start collecting things that might come in useful forever.
Yeah, definitely. So don't ever throw those pipe cleaners away.
Or let's just all go around to Gemma Chapman X's house, because she's got the stash.
She's got 15 years worth of
well, yeah.
Gemma, you've got 15 years worth of stash. We're coming round to you. So Love My Prince TY, Ty, I'm presuming that is, rather than thank you. She says, for younger kids, this is a very good point actually for you on this one, Jamie. For younger kids, switch activities every 10 to 15 minutes. Their attention span will work better.
I learned that when you're doing presentations for people, you shouldn't hold the same slide for more than 7 minutes, because that seems to be a bit of an attention span thing. And there's something about 7s and 14s and stuff like that where people do lose their mind. So that's a good one. So what kind of craft could you do that peaks about 7 minutes and then tails off with a sense of vague completion at 14 minutes? Answers on a postcard too.
Yes, biscuits, cooking.
Biscuits can also be sent along with answers on a postcard too.
Yes. Jamie, what is your favourite biscuit?
Oh, wow. Whoa, I wish you'd warned me about that question. I know this. I used to really like the Jaffa cakes that were completely covered in chocolate. I know that when I stopped smoking, I went from 20 cigarettes a day to 20 bourbon biscuits a day. So they're good. And I also know that when I used to do workshops, if I bought a packet of biscuits to have for just general, people using, dark chocolate hobnobs presented personally the highest value.
Wow.
Or I know that, sorry, I'm going on here now. I know that from a dunking standpoint, the digestive biscuits with caramel on them are good because the caramel holds the structure for longer. And I also know it is possible to dunk an entire cup of tea away using a packet of rich tea biscuits because I've done it.
So I take it you're not really a biscuit fan then?
Don't really like them, no. Don't.
Answers, please email us on show@lovecrafts.com your favourite biscuits and why, and also your, all the things you've done with your kids, because we'd really love to know. I love the best comment we've got. This is hilarious.
Oh, I thought you were going to say what biscuit you love, because you can't just leave that hanging. What's your favourite biscuit?
It's tricky, but it would have to be a custard cream.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my children just think that is the weirdest thing in the world, but they're bourbon people. I don't like bourbons.
The thing that always impresses me about a custard cream is the amount of design that's gone into the top of it with the little swirls and stuff. You don't get that on your average biscuit, do you?
No, you don't. And I think that's why I like them. I like them because I love that sort of filigree thing.
And have you ever, because sometimes you see recipes for make your own Jaffa cakes and stuff like that, isn't it? If anybody's ever done that, can they tell us and possibly send us some?
I remember someone making homemade wagon wheels. I think that was a big ask. Homemade marshmallow. But I have made my own giant custard creams. No, they weren't that great.
No.
Not really, no. Because in all honesty, corn flour, it doesn't matter what you do, it really doesn't taste that nice. And so even if you mix it up with custard powder, which is corn flour flavoured custard powder, no, it didn't really work. But anyway, that's another story for another date. Now, I must tell you this comment because it's very funny. So Greg Inglos, could be that, says boredom is good. They'll entertain themselves eventually. You see, there's an awful lot in there. Sometimes you can't push them into doing things, kids. You have to let them find their own entertainment.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you don't want them to have a box of matches at the time, but you do want them to kind of dream things up and have a go at things if you give them the stuff. Obviously at a certain age.
Give them the stuff. Have some noise-cancelling headphones so that you don't have to listen to the wailing and gnashing for half an hour and then come back and be like, oh, darling, you've made paper. You've done some quilling. What
to do when you're bored. Actually, yes. Show@lovecrafts.com. Please write and tell us, what do you do when you're bored? What do you get your kids to do when they're bored? How do you help them? What do you tell them to do?
How do you find that line between keeping them entertained while being quite amused at the way they writhe with boredom? Is that fair?
Yes, that's entirely fair. I think that's really good.
Those are great suggestions.
Yeah, they are great suggestions, aren't they? I think the key here is understanding what your children really like and giving them the materials or the ideas to go and action them and really reward them with your attention.
Yeah. And just give them support, because that's probably the most important thing, isn't it? Is to encourage them non-judgmentally.
Yeah. And if you do want to knit and crochet, because obviously I know, obviously being a big fan of knitting and crochet, as soon as your children have got the dexterity they need for knitting, crochet, stitching or whatever, and some children will get that really early and some children will get that late, and it's no biggie, it's just nerve endings growing. So don't get cross if yours can't do it yet, because they eventually will. I mean, I can remember my son playing the clarinet. At some point it was like somebody had sort of cut all his fingers off and sellotaped them onto the wrong fingers again. And then the following week, all of a sudden he could play a scale really beautifully. So I think once you are ready to teach them something like that, I would always say start with a chunky yarn, something quite big, and if you're going to knit, some circular needles that have a short cable so that you don't drop them and things don't, we've written about this on the inspiration section of the website, so it's worth going and having a little look. We've also got some great videos to teach you how to knit.
Fantastic videos.
Some
of the best I've ever seen.
Oh, some old girl doing it. And then if you're going to crochet, same sort of thing. You can make funky blankets in really bright colours. Just embrace the few hours it will take to get them through the hump of learning those stitches. And once they're off and racing, a giant granny square will carry them through hours and hours and hours of fun. I think we've got a video for that, actually.
If I may proffer some similar sewing advice.
Do it.
Just letting them stitch whatever. Like, I've had plenty of workshops where I've gone, here's a simple design made of cross stitch that we're going to do. And in the end, I've gone, look, just try and get the needle through the hole and hit, make sure that you don't pull the needle out of the thread all the time. Just resign yourself to confidence with a needle, I think, in the first place, because cross stitch particularly very simple to do, but you've got to get past the frustration of threads coming out and not getting it through the hole and those sorts of things. So just almost allowing it to be free-form jazz rather than the classical orchestra you had in mind.
Oh, I think that's a great analogy. That is exactly it. Let them just, some children will want formality, but others just let them flow.
Let them play jazz, man.
I
always used to say, show them the ropes and let them go skipping.
Very nice. You've got some great phrases today. You're on fire.
Thanks. I literally am. I think that probably brings us to a natural end of this episode of the LoveCrafts Show, wouldn't you say?
I think it does. I think we've, I hope that we've been helpful with entertaining your children.
We welcome all feedback in all forms, particularly with accompanying biscuits. But no, all feedback, because I think as we move forward with this, particularly we're on a weekly schedule, we want to get more conversation going, don't we? We want the bants with the pubs.
We do.
Banter with the public.
The banter with the public. Please email us and tell us what you'd like to hear us talking about. Anything crafty. We do love crafts.
We do love crafts.
We do love crafts.
And we love all the crafts as well. Like, we want to hear from you about obscure crafts. We want to hear from you about crafts that we don't understand or know about so that we can become learned. Heck, we might even invite you on the show for an interview.
Oh, please come on and talk to us. Yeah, please do tell us all your crafting stories.
I want to know from you,
yeah.
What was the last good... Are you ready?
Yeah, I am.
What was the last good thing that you thinged?
You see, every time he asks me this, I worry because I think I can't think of anything really exciting. But today I can think of something really exciting. Well, it's really exciting to me. So I'm currently obsessed with my sourdough starter. And last night I made a sourdough loaf. Elsie. Apparently all sourdough starters should have female names. I don't know why this is the case, but apparently
that's like hurricanes as well, right?
Yeah, well, yes, maybe there's something in common there, the way they just set off on their own. So I made a loaf of bread last night and it wasn't fully proved. And then I remembered, this was about 11:30 last night, I remembered that I would either have to sit up for a few hours to let it prove again and then bake it, or put it in the fridge to let it prove overnight. Having never done this before, I did it. This morning I came scurrying down like Mrs. Tiggywinkle, grabbed the fridge door and was delighted to see that it had puffed up like a mushroom.
Oh,
so
amazing.
It went in the oven and it is, well, if I say so myself, it's pretty lovely. So that's what about you now? Tell me the last good thing that you thinged.
So the last good competitive television program that I binge watched was a program called Ink Master, which is, imagine the Great British Bake Off, but for tattoo artists.
Oh, wow.
It's been going, it's on in the States. It's really good. And then it's on like series 13 now or something.
Wow.
And then they've also now started a spin-off show, which is called Ink Master Redemption. Because what they have is, like if you bake a cake and it's crap, you just throw the cake in the bin. If you do a tattoo on someone who's volunteered to have a tattoo on them and it's crap, they've got a crap tattoo for the rest of their lives. So this redemption program is where people who got really crap tattoos come back, have a bit of a row with the guy who did it, who then they'll do them another tattoo as a way of redeeming themselves.
That's amazing. I don't have any tattoos personally, but I think tattoo artists are incredibly talented people. Sounds really cool. So, Jamie, dare I ask, have you got a song to sing us off with?
Well, this is it. So let's finish as the way we normally finish, which is by saying, thanks everybody. This has been the LoveCrafts Show. I've been Mr. X Stitch.
And I'm Merion.
Now everything is new and all I've learned has overturned. I beg of you, don't go wasting your emotion. Lay all your LoveCrafts on me. Thanks very much.
Marvellous.
Like that.
See you next time.
Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.